We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
If it seems to you that wokeness or extreme progressivism is becoming the dominant ideology in the political sphere, you're not alone. It is, after all, trumpeted as being right and just and decent by the Fourth Estate and by elected politicos. But perhaps these denizens of the radical left are just talking to each other in a shallow echo chamber, and you and I are just getting caught in the crossfire. Well, to find out if this detrimental and often contradictory ideology has any legs, we're joined by author, scientist, and watcher of all trends political, Mr. Onar Am. Welcome to the show, Onar.
Thank you.
So tell me, Onar, is this rush to all things identitarian a serious contender for the dominant ideology, or will it collapse under the weight of its own contradictions?
Well, I mean, I can't see the future, but they have had 50 years or more to do this by taking over the universities and all of these things. So they do have a lot of momentum on their side. But if we're lucky, this is more like Germany in 1941, which was when they were at their peak. So I hope to see that they do collapse under their own weight. They are not able to have a multi-front war.
You say that obviously that this is an ideology that's prevalent in the universities and presumably other educational institutions, because obviously we've seen with the current arguments against CRT that although there's no specific course taught as CRT within high schools, the elements of critical race theory, they're behind the other topics. So it's history taught through critical race theory. It's, as we've seen recently, maths taught through the lens of critical race theory. So how do you, please?
I think that the important thing to recognize here that even though the word critical race theory is not used in high schools, it is taught in teacher schools. In other words, teachers are taught critical race theory directly, and they're taught what is called critical pedagogy, which is even worse. It's because it doesn't involve just critical race theory, but all critical versions of Marxism.
Could you expand on that a little for me?
Well, critical theory emerged in the 1930s and 40s in the so-called Frankfurt School, which were Marxists who were disappointed that Karl Marx's revolution failed, and workers in Europe just didn't want it. So they were thinking, how can we proceed along those lines? And how can we get utopia if people don't want it? And they came up with the idea of critical theory. And the latest installment of that is, or the great guru of the so-called New Left, is Herbert Marcuse, who sold millions of copies and became the guru of the hippie movement in the 1960s. And he basically said that the problem is that people are too happy. We have to destroy their happiness. We have to destroy their identity, tear it down, and rebuild it so that they develop what he called critical consciousness. In other words, they have to realize that they were really living in hell rather than in a relatively good place. And once you have people who are sufficiently hateful and angry about how awful things are in the world, then you could rebuild the world in Marx's image.
It seems to me that the rise of wokeness, as we call it, it's almost something that's filling a void. What do you make of that?
Definitely. This would not have happened if we were a healthy culture. And I guess this goes back to materialism, the idea that you don't really need to have any form of agency in the world. You don't need to make your own decisions. You only just need to fill your needs through material needs. So if you have enough money, if you have enough food, everything will be okay. And now this has been expanded to if you have access to Facebook and so forth, and you can have good movies to watch, you'll be happy. Turns out that's not how humans work. People need to have meaning in their life. And the absence of meaning has resulted in a meaning crisis where people actively try to seek out alternatives to the old sources of meaning, such as Christianity. So no one wants to be Christian anymore. So they seek out, they become involved in environmentalism. They want to save the world from global warming, and they want to help trans people, and they want to do this, and they want to do that. So they search meaning through these progressive ideologies. Wokeness is a form of a religion.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's not so much that people want to find meaning, but they want to be the heroes of their own story. They want to be the lone defender of any popular trope or any popular idea, so they can be recognized as a hero in themselves. And I think it's quite an empty existence for them.
I think you're absolutely right. However, meaning is to be the hero of your own story. It just doesn't mean that you're necessarily the hero of the world. If you have a family, if you have children, if you have a wife or a husband, then that is a source of meaning in and of itself, because you have to be the hero in someone else's life. And today, when you see people don't have any children anymore, they don't go to church, they don't do anything, they just consume these material goods. They starve for being a hero, and then they turn to these woke ideas.
Okay, so in your opinion, is this a wave rather than a push, as in it will recede in time until the next thing comes along?
I hope that it's a wave, and I think it's a wave, because the progressives make up in America about 8% of the population. And when you see what's going on TV, you get the impression that they make up 90%. But that's not true. Like, on both the so-called left and the so-called right, people don't like this. And it's building up to a crescendo of where people are just going to say, we don't want this. It doesn't have to be like a violent rejection of it. It might just turn out to be that it fades away in a wave.
Speaking of politicians, that they do try and capture movements, and they try and benefit from those movements. It's an age-old position. But why do so many politicos think that this in particular was such a good cause to latch onto?
I think it is in part because of the language that is involved, that is specifically designed to bamboozle a certain group of people. So using terms like racist, homophobe, xenophobe, all of these phobes and other derogatory terms, they're specifically designed to appeal to people who are concerned with being good people. And they're designed to target universalists, people who regard everyone as equal. So calling someone racist only works in the West, because that's the only place where people are not racist. Calling people homophobe only works in the West, because that's the only place where people are not so-called homophobes, and so forth. So in other words, it's specifically a parasitic strategy that is designed to take over the brains or minds of people, and using their compassion and morality against them. And that's why it is so effective. And so I regard most of these politicians as almost equally captured by this, as big pushers of the ideology. In other words, they feel trapped in this as much as the victims of these politicians. Yep.
Oh, no, thank you ever so much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Now, don't go anywhere. Later in the show, we're discussing California, guns, and abortion. You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Later in the show, we tackle former Governor Andrew Cuomo and the order for him to hand back the book dollars on our Talking Liberty segment. But coming up next, though, we'll be talking with Tim Donner on the media's obsession with the resurgent Donald Trump. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.